Very good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to another session of BIG series. Today we'll be covering the healthcare theme. And as an expert panelist, today we have Mr. Vijay Simha, who has been associated with BIREC as an expert panelist in the healthcare sector, and he's also been associated with IIT Kanpur as one of the mentors and has been mentoring our startups as well for the Biotechnology Ignition Grant. Mr. Simha has been working as on the healthcare solutions that serve the primary and secondary healthcare entities, specifically in the emerging economies. And his specialty lies in the medical devices, diagnostics, and biotechnology, aerospace, and robotics and plant automation. He has been working. He is associated as an CEO to Audicor Cardiometrics Private Limited, and he is also associated as an advisor to Lemonson Foundation, and working as a chair to the task force innovation in healthcare technologies in FICCI, and also as an advisor to tech and innovation to the waste impact. So I am the host. I'll be hosting today's session. I'm Rohini Chawla, and I'm currently managing Biotechnology Ignition Grant at SIIC IIT Kanpur. And if anybody in the audience is having any questions, they are requested to post their questions in the chat box, and we'll be taking the questions during the discussion session, and after I have given a small introductory talk about the Biotechnology Ignition Grant. So at SIIC this year, we are celebrating 20 years of establishment, and we are also celebrating 100 incubated startups. And we are very proud that we have supported a number of more than 300 innovators, and which includes 35 plus women entrepreneurs, and there have been more than 65 patents filed, and 100 plus the startups have received 100 plus crores of follow-on funding. All these startups have been in different domain areas. So our current portfolio includes the healthcare, agri-tech, IT hardware, educational technology, clean tech, waste to value, and sanitation. And so if you feel that you have an idea and you want to venture towards the entrepreneurship journey, and you're looking for different funding programs, so at SIIC we support the entrepreneurs at different stages of their who are at different stages at their technology. So for example, for the ideation stage, we have a number of programs like Nidhi EIR, IITK Innovation Fellowship, TIDE, and SPERSH. And for a prototyping stage, we have a Biotechnology Ignition Grant, which will be the focus of the talk today, and we'll be covering the healthcare technologies. We have PRISM, we have Nidhi Prayas, and TIDE MVP grant. And for the seed program, we have BIREC Seed, IITK Innovation Seed Support, Nidhi Seed Support, TIDE 2 Seed Support, and for further scale up, we have PRISM and EIENG SUI. So if you want more information about these programs, please visit our website as siicincubator.program to get the more details. So coming to the Biotechnology Ignition Grant, it is basically for those individuals who have a minimum of graduation degree and startups which are less than 5 years old. And it basically supports research-based business ideas to the proof of concept and validation. It's a royalty-based grant for 18 months, and it provides the grantee with 50 lakh rupees, and it is not a research grant, so it supports those ideas which have the potential to be commercialized, and it can come from either from the faculties or research scientists or anyone who has a basic graduation degree or a startup less than 5 years old. So it covers a number of themes, and for example, in healthcare, it covers diagnostics, medical devices, drugs, vaccines, and drugs and delivery systems. It also covers industrial biotechnology, agriculture and allied areas, waste management, and clean energy and related areas. So as we'll be focusing today, healthcare technologies. So let me just highlight some of the previous grantees from SIIC cohort who have received biotechnology ignition grant in the healthcare sector. And few of the examples are, for example, one of the grantee has received the grant for his idea for the NIR based brain hemorrhage detection device. Then another grantee has received the grant for the device for the cervical cancer detection. Then we have a professor who applied for this grant, and he successfully received it. And his idea was basically on the remedial orthosis for clubfoot disease. And then we have another grantee who proposed proposed a device for the preeclampsia screening. Then we have a grantee who is developing the retrofittable device for rapid urine detection. And then we have a doctor and also who is also working as a professor who proposed the idea for the detection of the cancer, cervical cancer. Then some of the other examples from the startups are, for example, there's one startup who has proposed multi-level therapy kit development in virtual reality for high functional autistic patients. Then there was from veterinary science, there was one proposal which was on diagnostic assay for detection of PCV2 in pigs. Then we had a wearable device for detecting epileptic seizures. Another startup proposed robotic UVC for hospital room disinfection with the sensor navigation. And then a PhD student proposed a wearable device for the detection of the epileptic seizures. So as you can see, these examples are from the people who are coming from the various backgrounds, from the academia as well as working as a scientist, and also from the startups, and also people who have just a normal graduate degree and who applied and they received the grant successfully. So if you want to apply for biotechnology ignition grant, for anybody who is interested, you should register at the website which is mentioned on the top of the slide. And once you have registered, you have to fill in the online application form, which is separate for an individual, and there is a separate form for the company. And then the applicant has to choose one of the BIG partners. Currently, BIREC has 8 BIG partners, and SIIC IIT Kanpur is one of the 8 partners. So evaluation criteria is basically based on the number of criteria. So applicants should focus on the technical feasibility of their ideas. They should see whether how novel their idea is, and if the idea is not absolutely novel within the country, or if it is already there in the international markets, and they should see that they are trying to propose something which comes with some additional values. For example, they are proposing something which has a very deep potential, can have a potential impact across the nation, or they are proposing something which has some further improvement on the current devices or diagnostic devices or medical devices which are already there in the market, and those what they are proposing is comparatively cheaper. Plus, they should have some commercialization strategy while they are applying for, while you're filling the application form, or pitching in front of the experts committee. Then you should have the appropriate team members. For example, applicants should have a clear idea about what kind of technical as well as the business mentors or team members will be required for them to successfully execute what they are actually proposing. They should also think about the barriers and what are the limitations they can potentially face while they are executing this project, or also when they are trying to reach to commercialize their project, proposed work. And overall, they should have a sound BIG plan in terms of a proper proof of concept, and they should also have a clear idea about the budget and other factors. So it is a very, biotechnology ignition grant is a very, very competitive grant, but it is a risk-free way to realize the entrepreneur dream. And plus, it also assures anybody who has received the grant that it assures that the person or the grantee receives the follow-on funding. So the budget in the biotechnology ignition grant has been divided into a number of sections. For example, for equipment, 30% of the entire grant money has been devoted to equipment, and another 30% has been devoted to manpower. Then consumables and contingency is flexible. Then 1.5 lakhs have been devoted to IP and patent, 1.5 lakhs to travel, and the rest to the other miscellaneous expenses. So anybody who has received the biotechnology ignition grant, they most of those applicants and grantees are being promoted or are being further recommended for the follow-on fundings like SIBRI and BIPP. So this really helps the grantees to to move towards the commercialization and reach to the market. And the evaluation criteria for while you're applying for the biotechnology ignition grant is basically that your idea should not be beyond technology readiness level 3. So breaking down the technology readiness level. So if the technology readiness level 1 means that you are at currently at ideation stage, which means that you have the clear idea about the basic principles of technology, and it has been reported, and the need in the country has been identified. So at technology readiness level 2, you have proof of principle. You have done your market surveillance, and you have the data of the competitor. You have done the competitor analysis to support the idea, and you have the basic design with you of the medical device or diagnostic device, and you have done the patent landscaping, and FTO has been assured, and the development of individual components have been initiated. And if at the technology readiness level 3, you have a proof of concept demonstrated, which means the individual modules, components, and any software or systems have been developed and tested separately. And at the laboratory level, and material safety and electrical safety and biocompatibility has been identified, and it has been demonstrated. Plus, you have also proven the biocompatibility in vitro studies. So, for all the applicants who are interested to apply for the BIG, they should make sure that they should not go beyond, their idea should not be beyond the TRL level 3. So this is one of the major criteria for evaluation and eligibility also. So for the evaluation process, it has been divided into 4-tier process. First, the applications are screened for preliminary selection by this preliminary selection committee, where the applications are basically selected basis on the basic eligibility criteria, adequacy of details, and plagiarism. Then further shortlisted applicants are being sent online to be reviewed by the subject experts and business experts. which are being shortlisted, and BIREC has a complete portal of such experts from across the nation who evaluate the proposals. And then the recommended proposals by the online reviewers are further then called for the presentation before the technical evaluation panel committee. Once the applicant has presented in front of the technical panel evaluation committee, their proposals are being shortlisted further on the basis of the scores, geometric mean, the scores given by the technical evaluation panel committee members. And then finally, the expert selection committee will decide, they decide the final cutoff, and based on that cutoff, the proposals are being further recommended for BIG funding. So why you should why you should choose SIIC IT Kanpur if you're and why you should apply through us? Because as an entrepreneur, apart from BIG, of course, we have number of other funding programs as well, and we promote our applicants for the other funding programs. Not just for the biotechnology ignition grant, we have a very strong pool of mentors who come from business as well as the very strong academic background, which includes the IIT Kanpur faculty as well. We have we provide the applicants or the entrepreneurs with a prototyping facility. We have a very strong network across the globe, alumni network, and we have a network of angel investors, venture capitalists, management firms, and we also provide the intellectual property. We have the intellectual property information cell where we provide the entrepreneurs in filing the patents, and the technology transfer cell. Then we also connect our incubators or our applicants to the B2G market and B2B market, and various other, provide them with the various policy level support and other support, which is very important. For example, like regulatory consulting, product consulting, and various other funds for the prototype development, which are very, very important for them to further commercialize their product. So this is a few examples of mentors at IIT Kanpur. So we have a very strong mentors pool, and they who are veterans, and they have extreme experience in the industry as well as in the academia. For example, we have Dr. Ajay Chaudhary, who is the founder of HCL Technologies. Then we have Dr. Saurabh Shrivastava, who is the founder of NASCOM, and Pawan Chaudhary, who is the chairman of MTAI and independent director of TransAsia Biomedica. Then we have Dr. Rakesh Bhargav, who is the member of the board and former chairman of Fresenius Kabi Oncology Limited. And then we have Sanjay Banerjee, who is the former MD of Zimmer Biomet. We have Yashdeep Kumar, who is the global and R&D head of Stryker Corporation. Mr. Sanjeev Sharma, who is the chairman and advisory board of Asia and former MD at the Baxter India. Then we have Shrikant Shastri, who is the board member of SIIC IT Kanpur and Venture Center Pune, and national expert, and he's part of a National Expert Advisory Committee, DST and Government of India. Then in agriculture, we have Mr. Biplab Paul, who is the founder of Narita Services, and he's also an angel investor. And Mr. Hemendra Mathur, who is the co-founder of Think Agritech Bharat Innovation Fund, and also the chairman and task force for startups at FICCI. So while you are applying for biotechnology ignition grant at SIIC IIT Kanpur, so we help our applicants with the pre-submission, where we provide applicants with one-to-one mentoring on the grant writing at every step. And after their applications has been submitted, we provide them with mentoring with business as well as technical experts, as well as we also provide them special sessions on the IP and regulatory issues. And depending upon on the requirement, and also the requirement and the kind of work they are focusing on. We also make sure that we provide them with the proper technical experts as well as the business experts, which can help them in the future to for connecting them to the market and help them to help in the, which will eventually help them in the commercialization. So so if you want to connect with us, so you can email us at the bioincubator@ac.in, and for further information you can also reach out to us at SIIC Incubator website. And so now I'll be moving and requesting Dr. Simha to start throwing some light, because on the applications and application process, and what exactly as an individual entrepreneur or as a startup they should focus on, and what factors they should try to focus, so that as a BIG grant aspirant, so that while they are pitching towards the committee members and or they are writing the BIG grant. So over to you, Dr. Simha.
Thank you, Rohini. That was an excellent coverage of the program, and I'm sure most of you would be interested in knowing what happens in the process of trying to get a grant for your project and your idea. I would quickly switch on my sharing to a PowerPoint. But before that, I would like to mention that this coverage is not only in the area of BIG, but it's a very generic form of how a presentation or a proposal should look like when you apply for a grant. So BIG, of course, is an important and a very prominent player in this innovation process. That it happens to be also a very mature one, and we have seen it evolve over the years, not only to keep up with the quality and the nature of the innovation process, but it has also been synchronized with the kind of activity that is happening across many other grant-giving organizations internationally. That's not necessarily only in India. And so therefore, the standards of our proposals now that we are receiving are of international quality, and it's much to the credit of the folks at the various incubators, which include SIIC, IITK, to have been able to look through and understand that some of these innovations can have massive impacts, not only in India, but globally, right? So my intent here today would be to take you through some of the things that we as reviewers, not necessarily as big reviewers, but of course, every reviewer has his own, idiosyncrasy, if you can call it that way. But the more important thing is that every reviewer is an expert in his field, and therefore would look to understand in more detail. But the clear objective of this program is to take science to society, which is that you need to be able to prove or at least demonstrate to us that whatever science or proof of concept that you're developing would have its impact on society, which is build a business, get adoption done, and at the same time build an enterprise that is sustainable over a period of time. So I'll probably switch over to presenting my screens, and whenever you have questions, you can just pop it in the question box, I guess. And I will try to pause between the 3-4 slides and see if there are any questions, and then I will proceed on to that. So I would encourage you guys to sort of participate as much as you can, right? So how do I do that? And it goes like this. And then I will is my screen kind of like showing up
Yes.
on your screens? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm addressing you guys as the ignited minds. And I'm just trying to tell you what we as reviewers of proposals think would be an awesome proposal for your idea to POC grant. Just to recollect, in the last session that we had, we said that this is the flow chart that actually describes the flow of the big review or any other generic grant review process, whether it may be the Indo-American, Science and Technology Endowment Fund, the National Science Foundation, or any other grant internationally. You go through this process of being able to meet up with the requirements of the grant agencies, whether it is for a specific focus or it could be just an innovation which could have a potential for massive impact. And when I say impact, it could also mean that it has a potential for good businesses and return of investments. Right. So what you need to keep in mind here is that when you start your journey into developing a product or developing a concept, it has to have scientific veracity, which means that the scientific aspect of it has to be deep, deep enough to be able to withstand the questions that scientists are going to ask you, right? So therefore, this kind of background reading and research is an important factor for your proposal that you're going to submit. Ensure that you keep a track of what you have read. Keep the end in mind, which means that you are going into the market, you are going to get adoption, and you're going to make a business out of it. So how does the process workflow move from one end to the other end without too much of saying, oops, I forgot this, or oops, I forgot that, right? You need to instill confidence that the project process is under your control. Now, we have a very sophisticated bunch of people who are very good project managers and have run projects as veterans. So therefore, they would come up with a lot of questions and testing of your understanding of what project management skills you will be applying to be able to get to this. And more importantly, whatever may be the project, you always would need to do a pivot, or you need to have a plan B or plan C if your plan A doesn't work. So that is something that you need to keep up your sleeves. Whenever there is a situation that comes up there, your plan B can smoothly move into process. Whether it's your science that's not working and you need to move to a plan B where you need to find a science that will actually meet your objective, or you need to be able to understand the market and say that, oops, the market has changed. And so therefore now I need to have a plan B to be able to figure out how do I address the new markets, right? So this is what an astute businessman would do. Not much of a scientist, but talking as a businessman, that you need to have a plan B or a plan C also, if possible. Give a good impression that you have had a good research of the state of art in IP. I've seen a lot of projects come in with a very superficial headline understanding of what the subject matter is, and then it's not the volume of it, but it is the intensity at which you have been able to go down to the details, like processes, the outcomes, the steps that have been taken in these various researches that you have done. I think that is an important matter. And this is related much to the fact that the quality of references that you give need to be of good quality. There are papers there which are of poor quality. There are papers of good quality. And the way that I probably look at is, if it's a good quality paper, it would be cited in many, many other, sort of research articles. So the citations are important in that. So peer-reviewed articles can be of good quality, not too good quality. By looking at the paper itself, we will be able to see that inadequate cohort size, observational studies, not regular pivoted trials, so on and so forth, right? So they are not under this kind of environment. And then at the end of the day, of course, we look at whether you're focused in being able to handle what you are proposing, right? Many of you will probably say that I have a platform technology that can have this application, and this application. But at the same time, you have a time scale in which you need to prove your proof of concept. So don't flip between these various applications. Maybe put them as plan Bs and plan Cs, but pick an application that you know is going to work and focus on that, so that you are able to say that these are my definitive outcomes. I can predict these outcomes are going to be here at this kind of, in medical science, it could be specificity and sensitivity outcomes, plus minus whatever it is, right? But these outcomes are business worthy, which means that they would withstand the competition. When you arrive at the end of the program, you have something that can challenge the market players at the moment to say that I have a better technology than these guys have today, right? So keep this in mind while you are working on the project. Now, I will go through some of these points in terms of trying to understand what exactly would be the elements that you would probably like to incorporate in that. For example, the robustness of your science. Research into the science is one of the major topics where a lot of people just do a superficial research. But when we scientists or the engineers or the professionals go a little deeper into it, we find there is a little falteration in the process. Now that gives us a feeling that the science that you are trying to cover is not adequately researched so as to gain that ability to master the process, right? If you don't understand the science properly, you would probably not be able to make a good process to come to a final proof of concept. So this is something that you need to give a confidence that you have done this, and probably it's also very important for you because there are a lot of nitty-gritties in the science which you will realize on the bench, and which would probably not work if you didn't understand it much. But more important, I think more important part of it is look at the frailty of that particular science to ensure that whatever you do in the lab can be translated onto the field. Not all sciences can be translated directly onto the field without an appropriate, proper packaging of that science, right? So we are sensitive to that because we have tried many things which work on the bench, but not necessarily will work on the field. Keep in mind your environment, cohort size, citations, sensitivity and specificity numbers. These are your targets in which you will be able to work within this environment. The second part of it, of course, is what I was talking about is the adaptation part of it. Laboratory science, not necessarily bedside or field science applicable. Do scenario planning in the workflow. In the sense, take steps in your program to be able to take your steps through the workflow itself. And what is the workflow? The workflow is the process from taking the sample, say a patient walking into the clinic, to the patient completing his treatment process, right? So it's the continuum of care, which is your workflow. And if you fit into that workflow, how do you fit into it? Does it save money? Does it, pose risks because of certain errors that can come in due to your product? Are you controlling artifacts and noise because that's bad data? Skill requirements that are required to operate it. If you have a very sophisticated machine, you will require a set of NASA trained engineers to be able to operate this device, and understand the end-to-end workflow so that you will be able to map exactly where your technology and how your technology should look like at any of these sort of stages of workflow. And then finally, at the end of the day, you would like to see that the patient is happy, satisfied, and the outcomes, clinical outcomes, are favorable to what it was, right? To do this, of course, describe the end user persona very well. And this persona, both in terms of reference to its clinical utility as well as in the workflow. When I say clinical utility, it would be the persona's experience, whether it's a doctor in using it, in terms of ease of use, the prestige it will bring to the doctor, the efficiency at which he can handle and all a procedure, and at the same time, it doesn't make too many mistakes, or it doesn't make him, get into a trap where the machine was at fault, right? And the workflow, of course, the workflow is important in his efficiency at which he's doing it with error-free condition. So many of you must be scientists and engineers too. So therefore, you know the importance of process capability, that a 1.6 or a 2.0 CPK is required in all your processes, so as to make the persons who are using it confident that there is no error in the system. Okay, so the other part of it here is a reason for your existence. Come on, I mean, you are getting into this business because you've got an idea, and this idea is going to have an impact, and that is your reason for existence, right? You're going to make things better, you're going to make things cheaper, and you're going to make things much, much more accessible to people who are the stakeholders in your healthcare continuum. So look at the current state of art. And this is a real need which is across the world. And the COVID pandemic has taught us a lot of things that, you know, there are so many things that we can be leaders in, right? We look at global markets for two reasons. One is that the Indian market may not be big enough for us, may not be, you know, sort of satisfying enough for a large business, and all human beings have the same sort of needs that are there. So therefore, your product can be a global leader. Keep that in mind, use that as an ambition. And when you do that, pick out the top two global market leaders against which you will put your product in competition against, right? This is a very useful thing for people who want to actually compete in the market, and obviously you won't be a market leader overnight, but you will understand their strategies, you will understand their operations, and also you will understand what makes them click to a large extent. If you get an immersion and a deep dive into some of their financial strategies, you can, most of these public companies keep their financial books open, so you can go to their financial disclosures, look at how they deploy the funds, how they make money, in terms how much money they're putting into R&D, what are their distribution channels, how big they are, where are they located. All that stuff needs to be in your mind, so that at some point or the other, you're going to challenge all those points, right? So you will want to be a market leader, and that gives you sufficient amount of gaps to be able to, sort of work on or keep in cognizance while you are trying to become a global leader in that field. We are emphasizing this because Indian companies are now beginning to become global leaders in their own right. And so therefore, it's good that you also become a global player. And actually, that is the only, I would say, solution for a country to be able to establish its global leadership. And Atmanirbhar Bharat or Make in India could be a viable proposition that follows that global leadership. Because global leadership means competitiveness globally. If you are competitive globally, you're competitive in your own country, right? The market is going to be open. So check their market shares, zero in on those companies and say that this is my company that I'm going to take market share from, and look at a single feature of your product or your concept that would challenge the top three market leaders and say that you guys are not satisfying the complete need that is there in the market. And these are the three features that I will offer to compete with you guys, right? So this is something that you need to use internally, but sometimes we do ask, what is that single feature that makes you globally competitive? And that's what Rohini was talking about, barriers. It's called a barrier to entry. Competition, you make something novel, you will find 300 other companies making the same novel thing at a much cheaper price. And you become a bakra, because what happens is that you become the first mover. The first mover always has to spend more money trying to build a market. And the later movers do not even spend that kind of money. They just ride on your success and build that market, right? So use this feature of your concept, which could be an IP patented and keep you, sort of covered for a certain period of time, at least 20 years, that you could exclusively use your IP for gaining market leadership. I hope the ask is not too much. Summarize the significant improvements of the targeted process outcomes. As I mentioned, process capability, its repeatability under resource settings. Now, many of the multinational products, and this is something that I was addressing Rohini's requirement of saying that what is the challenges that companies would face being local versus global, right? And one of the challenges is basically that global companies sometimes do not address requirements of under-resourced settings. Now, you need to be able to get a very deep dive into understanding what is the challenges that are there that face things. Like, for example, if I can take an example, there are many processes like, CT MRIs, if you call it that way. They do not have an idea that we do not have CT MRIs in our primary healthcare centers, right? So therefore, conducting such a high-end, say, an angiography or even a CT MRI is not possible in such kind of settings. Do we have alternative methods, right? So, does our technology augment the process of being able to triage with a high degree of specificity that the conditions are there? Setting reduction in the differential diagnosis time. Also, sort of getting time and motion studies done during your immersion. I mean, of course, you have an immersion phase where you try to understand your market. Do you do adequate time and motion studies? Because one of the most important things in healthcare is the effectiveness, also the efficiency of the way the hospitals run. And today, a very important factor in hospitals is the understanding of Lean Six Sigma in processes, right? Which was used in the industry very successfully to improve productivity. Now, hospitals are realizing that their systems are not so efficient. So now they are beginning to implement time and motion study, cycle time studies, and so on and so forth to be able to bring very objective changes within their system to improve efficiency. And if you improve efficiency, you have a larger amount of patients that can be attended to, When you attend larger amount of patients, your revenue also goes up. So therefore, it's always better for the organization to be as efficient as possible. In the auto industry, just as an example, if you're not efficient, you're in the red. That's the kind of margins that are there in the auto component industry. And then in your presentation, which you will upload, not necessarily you will have this whole detail in your pitch, but you can have this uploaded in your presentation, which talks about the detailed table of your market leaders and your competitiveness against them. What is your single feature of your concept of how you're going to be competitive, which will include improvement of the speed at which you can be able to do the job, the capability of your system, the process capability of your diagnostic process, and the efficiency that it will bring into the system that will save money for that. So there is another concept that will come with this, and you will probably, in India, it's not yet being practiced in a large way, but in many of the, like, for example, I had a couple of instances where I was introducing product to the NHS. I had to do what they call as a health technology assessment part of it, where the health economics aspects were also measured. And the health economics was very much kind of like intertwined with the efficiency of the system, so as to ensure that expensive resources like doctors' time, nurses' time, hospital time, and so on and so forth was saved on, right? So that aspect, if you can look at, it would be an emerging requirement, because there are sounds of health technology assessment aspects, that is not only from the effectiveness but also from the economic impact it's going to have in its utilization and its outcome, would be a requirement in the Indian healthcare system eventually. And then many times as a reviewer, we are not very sure what is your final product positioning. Who is your customer? What is your price targets? How do you reach the customer? How do you train and service the customer? How do you maintain a sustainable business entity for that? A lot of people try to attract public health systems as your customers, but at the end of the day, they have no wherewithals on how they will reach each of their individual customers across the 25,000 or maybe 30,000 primary healthcare centers across the country. How will you do that with 6 people and maybe a couple of logistic companies? Still not good enough. How do you train them? What is the logistic method of training them? How will you be able to bring them up to speed? So these are all the things that you would probably need to be able to satisfy us that, okay, you'll make the product, but how do you take it to the last mile, right? Okay, so the other part of it is risk management. And this is something that, I mean, as Indians, of course, we say that, jo abhi chalta hai, theek hai, right? But we really never look at trying to mitigate risks that can happen in the future, both from the economic side, even from the scientific side, or even from the product or the technology side. And you must understand that you're not the only one who's thinking of that particular problem. There are hundreds of people thinking of that problem. There are hundreds of ways of solving that problem. You would probably not be looking at the landscape completely, because many of these technologies that are used to solving this problem could be under stealth mode, right? But you will find patents being filed, though publications may not be there. And so therefore, it is important to also understand that these patents that are being filed are, which are the ones that have large commercial potential, right? Of course, patents are filed left, right, and center. You will find many patents do not even get commercialized in any way. It is just a protection. So a lot of patents, land up in a situation where you pay more money just administrating the patents. You don't make any money out of it. and becomes a major expense for you. But it is a good idea to keep in touch and to keep in your radar the unknown emerging technologies that will challenge your proof of concept, which is basically um, your barrier to entry is not going to help in any way. But what is going to help really is the concept that the emerging technologies may not be technically as suave as your technology is. And so, therefore, keep in mind that the end use of the product, either it could be its sensitivity and specificity, or it could be the speed at which you can do the diagnostic process with the prevailing sensitivity and specificity, or you can cut down the costs very significantly, right? So challenges from these technologies will come up. You will find a lot of them will be using extremely sophisticated biomolecules, which will take 20 years to validate, right? But at the same time, keep that in mind and see that your business is sustainable to that. Of course, there are the other challenges is that you have to keep running as a business, because if you don't have a product roadmap, you would probably run out of ideas in 3 years' time, and your business will come to a situation where you'll have to start scratching your head and thinking. It's not only startups, it's true for large companies also, right? It's true for large multinationals also. There's a constant R&D spend that is happening to keep a product lineup ready for tomorrow, right? Maybe you have your own product lineup to kill your own old product and make your own products obsolete. That is important, and that is interesting, because it is better than some competitor making your product obsolete, right? So you make your own product obsolete. So that's the constant product roadmap that we'd like to see, whether your companies are geared towards that, right? Or is it just one flash in the pan and you're done? So that is one concept here. Your mission statement can be a generic one, but then focus on your minimum viable product for the time being, but keep a product roadmap always ready. Changing clinical utility paradigms is something that, I have been through it personally, through a number of these things. Like I was taking up the example of NT-proBNP. It is the gold standard today for heart failure. But the problem is that NT-proBNP sensitivity is very poor to heart failure in a fairly large range of applications. It's a fairly late stage, sort of a biomolecule or a marker. And the other example is pap smears. The sensitivity of pap smear dropped to something like 45%, which is worse than a toss of a coin, right? And this was not because of the cytological examination only, but it's also in the sampling process. So what happens at the end of the day is that people said, we don't depend on pap smears. We'll rather depend on something that's more definitive, which has a better sensitivity than pap smears for screening of cervical cancer. And so therefore, there is a whole bunch of things that have come up, and the workflow is basically pap smear or probably HPV DNA analysis. The next stage is a colposcopic examination, and the third stage is a biopsy, right, for confirmatory of cervical cancer. But this takes a long, long time. And it's extremely, extremely uncomfortable. It's also, I would say, still replete with poor sensitivities. Even colposcopy with, say, for example, vinegar that is VIA, we call it, the acetic acid visualization, is still very subjective, and without proper training, you could misinterpret. So biopsy is being taken left, right, and center because that's the gold standard. And biopsy also is something that, again, is subjective, and so therefore there are mistakes in biopsy too. Now we have changing antibiotics, anti-infective resistant organization, changing infection patterns. Like COVID, for example, started off with the fact that it attacked the lungs and the lungs were responsible for its morbidity. But now it's beginning to turn out that the vascular system is responsible for major part of the morbidity and the long-term effects of the COVID-19. The primary area of infection and the causative factors could be the vascular system. And I think this came out. This realization, of course, was known to us when clotting was there, when thrombocytopenia was there. And now it is being reclassified as a vascular disease rather than a lung disease, right? Now, this has changed the infection pattern totally. That's because we didn't know COVID-19 what it was. It was a total surprise to us. So therefore, these could be situations where chaos is created, and the morbidity factors, what we call the monitoring of the disease factors, the protocols for treatment would be completely different from ARDS. And we have seen it, right? Ventilators don't work very well in situations where patients have a morbid lung infection. It leads to a damage to the lung. So we need to look at it in a different way of how we have vaccinated the patient. And then, of course, there is the change in disease management protocols, which could be a major risk in your system. And if you look at the updated protocols from the, say, for example, I deal in cardiology a lot. So I keep track of the European Society of Cardiology and the American Heart Association or the American College of Cardiologists on what their recommendations come out every year on the different forms of disease management in cardiac diseases. And that is a very, very important thing for your ability to be able to do a deep dive into the domain. You have to be a domain expert before you really start making things for that particular domain, right? So I'll stop here and see if there are any kind of questions.
Yes, so there was one question from one of the applicant that they are actually a startup who are working on artificial intelligence and machine learnings, and we have been seeing this trend that a lot of startups are coming up in this area, AI and ML based solutions for in the health tech sector. So if you can just give some quick tips for such applicants,
Okay.
who and so that it maximizes their chance of getting accepted in the for the
Sure.
BIG.
Okay. Right. I have those slides with me on those quick tips. But before I go into that, one of the sad things that I have noted in some of the Indian products is the lack of attention to detail in aesthetics as well as ergonomics, right?
Right.
These are the two aspects which actually make a lot of difference. It's like a person who dresses to impress, right? I think that is a very powerful statement, that the aesthetics of the product, because these hospitals are fancy places, they spend lots of money in trying to build a very, very attractive looking workspace, impressive workspace, that it is important for you to be able to put aside concepts that is there. So what I do normally would be is that I would conceive of what an industrial design would look like in its final shape and size, and print it out, right? And I would go to as many as 20 people, both professionals, nurses, biomedical engineers, and also to lay people who could possibly, be patients or something of that sort, and say, like, on a score of 1 to 10, what do you think about this, right? And they would give you a score saying that, well, overall it looks 5 from my side or 8 from my side, right? Then the ergonomic side of it are the functional features. Like, we have 9 functional features that would be added to it, right? Maybe you can make up 9, and then go and talk to the physicians, the nurses, the biomedical engineers, and say, these are the functions that are there. on each of these functions, what do you score on a scale of 1 to 10? What do you say? Forget about computation, or I mean, you just take everything into aspect, and from the gut, you give me a number, right? 1 to 10. And I mean, don't ask friends because they will give you one, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So ask as much possible as a person would probably, he could be a critic, restaurant critic, or whatever it is, and and then you add this all up, and then you see on 100, and if you get below 75, well, some more work needs to be done, right? So this is something that you can actually begin to assess your final product of how it's going to look like, rather than trying to put it into a steel dabba and then after that trying to make it into a. Nowadays we have 3D printing, which is available very easily around. Just do it, just go ahead and let your imagination get the feedback from the people, appropriate people. Okay. All right. Now, for AI and ML, I said the primary part of any AI or any ML activity is your data, right? What data are you collecting? Is it the relevant data? If you're collecting the primary data, is it good? How will it improve the overall diagnostic outcome of your process? So that is the relevance part of it, right? If you are using more than, we tend to take one data set, which is, maybe one physiological signals. But many times it happens that we look for a multiple range of physiological signals to be put together, like a patient monitoring system. You have BP, you have ECG, you have SpO2, you have all these signals being picked up. And by looking at all these signals, we will be able to identify whether the SpO2 probe has just come off, because the alarm goes off even if one ECG electrode comes off, right? But that doesn't mean that the patient is dead, right? You will look at the SpO2. SpO2 is normal. Okay, ECG lead must have come off. Let me put it back again. So, those are the things which remove a lot of artifacts that could be a result of your single signal being acquired. Data sets should generally have a set of all these data. If you're going to use a machine intelligence system, your machine intelligence will also say that I need multiple cognitive inputs, right? I cannot just depend on visual. I just cannot depend on smell. I just cannot depend on, the idea is that human intelligence was built around multiple cognitive inputs, right? So all your sensory systems work together simultaneously to give you a higher degree of cognition and understanding. And so therefore your data collection and learning is based on all these cognitive inputs, right? So that's one of the things that you have to understand while trying to build a machine intelligence system, is to ensure that you have a multiple cognitive system in it. This is my advice to a large extent, because there are a lot of people who just depend upon one CT scan and say that, I'll do a diagnosis on that. No, that's not going to work, right? And that's not going to be able to get them the kind of thing that is there. The second part of it is your operator, your machine will have biases, right? And these are all subjective biases, which the machine learning system or your data management system or your analytical system has to be able to factor in. Otherwise, you will have a machine learning which is biased again based on the operator or the machine biases. Like I have ECG machines that can give ECG with sampling rates of 50 samples per second, or I can have another one with 5,000 samples per second, and another one with 50,000 samples per second, ECG resolutions, right? Do we put them all on the same platform? Question mark, right? What feature are you looking at? Is the data free of artifacts? Otherwise, I make a machine intelligence system that is learning more of artifacts than the actual signal, right? So that is one of those things that one looks at. Um, there is also a need, and many times I've also tried to, sort of ask these guys is, do you have a written draft of what how are you going to conduct a clinical investigation on this product once you build it, right? What is your clinical trial protocol, right? What is your cohort size you're going to choose? Who are the people who would be included? Who are the people who are not to be included in your clinical trial, right? So this is what we call as a clinic. And what is going to be the targeted outcome you're going to look for in terms of, say, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, sensitivity, specificity, or what exactly is your target to be able to produce on this? What are the statistical tools you will be using to be able to come to this, like with whether it is a region under the curve or whatever, I mean, you intend to do. And there is a standard, an international standard, which has been defined as a clinical investigation plan, which tells you that how you actually conduct yourself during a clinical investigation. How do you ensure that the quality of data is good? How do you ensure that the data is traceable and can be audited? And more importantly, whether you are HIPAA compliant because you're holding a lot of patient data with you. And there are privacy issues that you need to be compliant with. So all this stuff needs to be very clearly understood, and a draft written in advance while your proof of concept is being sort of developed, so that you have a clinical investigation plan. um, I've I've got a lot of flack from it because most of my clinical investigation plans run to about 10 pages of data with with very clear definition of who are the people working in the clinical trial, what are their roles, how do you set up an audit, how do you do random checks and find out that, and all that stuff, and a lot of people have told me, boss, can you put it in one page? It's too difficult for us. This is a fairly large hospital with a good incubator on it, and they were saying it's too difficult for us to actually handle such a detailed clinical investigation plan. But that doesn't have to stop you from doing that, because then you know that things are under your control, right? Okay, another part of AI ML, and it's so AI ML has become a facade for everybody to talk about. Today, AI ML are there in open source. They are there in platforms where you just have to port your data and things happen automatically, whether it's TensorFlow, whatever it is, right? Things happen in the background there. Then you have other systems that which can do most of this. Everybody now has something which can do an ML platform for you and will lend it out to you either free of cost or for a charge. But the problem is, how is your data? Is it accurate? Is it precise? Because if you train your ML system with data that is not qualified, you'll end up with an ML system that would become an idiot in human intelligence, parlance, if you call it that way, right? There's no use of that kind of a system. It would die almost as quickly as it came in. Just to give you a slight reference is the reference to a very sophisticated neurological system that was developed by IBM, and it beat all doctors in terms of its academic capability of being able to bring up evidence from published articles. But in terms of diagnosing a patient which sat in front of him, it failed miserably. So there are aspects of ML systems which probably I would say is something that is giving ML systems a bad name, if you can call it that way. Good for things like even an AI system for traffic management isn't working in Bangalore, whatever it is, right? So what happens is that you may have all that, but it still has to work, and otherwise it lands up with that. So you have a whole bunch of ML systems which are uh, more importantly non-functional, but great academic exercises, right? Um, Now, the other thing is that can you forecast and see you before the ML system can begin to do its analysis, it needs a set of algorithms by which it's able to interpret the data that is coming in so as to be able to make it learning worthy, right? And then of course the neural networks and behind it of course will give its appropriate role in being able to pull it out as a learning process. So there's a continuously online learning process that takes place. Now, these algorithms need to be interpretive or it could be predictive, but can you forecast and quantify the accuracy of the interpretation and predictive of these algorithms in terms of its specificity and sensitivity of being able to provide the necessary diagnostic outcome? The data input precision and accuracy is important, and this will help the ML system with enhanced metadata. Things like the biases and other factors need to be programmed into the metadata system for correcting biases and observational inaccuracies, right? So these are some things that today, because of the fact that AI and ML guys are a bunch of engineers, they don't understand what is the impact of the metadata in being able to influence the actual decision-making process in a clinical environment. So this metadata is what would differentiate between an idiotic ML and a more sensible ML, right? So that's one point that most of you will probably need to incorporate in your ML systems is a very strong domain intensive metadata set of for correcting biases and stuff like that. Now, what is important also is that algorithms are basically pulled off the net. Like, for example, if you want to detect, say, ST elevation, you have an algorithm to detect ST elevation using standard signal processing algorithms. Some people think that that is itself AI by pulling out the features and classifying them as ST elevation. Or you have a signal analysis program that can actually analyze the signal like heart rate variability into its components. Like, for example, you can into LF and HF in heart rate variability, which can be mapped to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic response. So that is being dubbed as AI. And, I would say that, well, PID controls are not necessarily AI, they are things that are intrinsic to the system, and so therefore they are not intelligence, they are more intrinsic so artificial intelligence, whatever. Yeah. So if you have a unique discovery of an algorithm, and this algorithm has greater clinical significance, I think you need to be able to specify that, and that should be your target. Effectively, that you have an algorithm that's better than the present set of biomarkers, or we have some biophysical markers also. It could be better than that, and it could improve the general diagnosability of a patient with greater degree of specificity. Why not talk about it or work towards it, as we would say, and talk about it? So as an example, I thought probably I'll show you one particular product that I introduced into the market. I mean, I have a range of about 27 products that I have introduced in the market. 9 of them are medical devices. So I'm not kind of biased only towards medical devices. I've done aerospace, I've done robotics, I've done all that stuff. But the idea is that I've been through the journey of actually making those products, getting them to the market, getting customers to buy it. You know, that is the real journey. That is the moment of truth when customers buy it. Otherwise, all that work goes for waste. You know, so there have been failures, not because of being a stupid product. Of course, that is one of the things which are a contributor to the failures. But there have been failures, things like, for example, I built a plane and a sports plane, and I was ready to fly it. I got permission, I got it evaluated, I did all the tests, almost 1,500 hours of logging tests on the plane, and it flew very well. It was not a plane that was new. I mean, it was a already um, well tested design, if you can call it, right from World War II. So it was based on a top T220 design, and it flew, and it was projected as a small commuter plane that people can fly from point A to point B if they wanted to go on commuting, because traffic jams are a problem. I can reach in less time. And today, of course, everybody talks about it, saying that we can at least send transplant organs or something of that sort, faster to the hospitals, or we can send vaccines faster to the hospitals. Fine, whatever may be your platform technology, but it was approved by the DGCA, right? As a plane that can fly, and it was safe to fly. But Indian customers did not trust DGCA. They said, "All you know what happens in DGCA." And I said, "Like, what happens there?" I've given them 1,500 hours of recordings, logged flight recordings, and well, they said, "No, you get an FAA approval, right?" FAA is the American approval. DGCA is the Indian civil aviation approval, right? Now, obviously, I mean, nobody wanted to buy the product because they didn't trust the DGCA certification. So these are some of the factors that you just don't know would happen and hit you. Like, you thought all the planes here in India fly with DGCA approval. I mean, in the sense that is there. But if I have to change a chair or a structure inside, say, a Boeing 737, right? DGCA cannot approve that. They have to get FAA approval parts for it, right? From the approved suppliers. So, these are some of the challenges you will face in regulatory systems. And it's like the Japanese saying that on the ski, the snow is better in Japan than in the US. So therefore, they need to be regulatory cleared in Japan for safety, right? So here is a product which, of course, shows to quite an extent some of the idiosyncrasies of an individual, market as such. Indian innovations are looked upon a little as the poor cousins of the innovations that come from overseas globally. It's a mindset. It's nothing to do with the product, right? It's a mindset. And this mindset needs to be overcome in some ways or the other. And my way of overcoming it was to introduce the product in Europe, get their approval, and then bring it to India. So we developed a method for diagnosing cervical cancer using a non-invasive method called electrical impedance spectroscopy, right? Nothing, just touch the probe. It measures the electrical impedance of the tissue up to a certain depth, and it will say if it is a low-grade cancer, pre-cancer, or a high-grade pre-cancer very quickly, in less than 10 minutes, or maybe probably in less than 15 minutes, if a person is not so familiar with the testing method, right? We published a number of papers. There was a clinical trial that was conducted, and of course, the importance of this was that when we compared it to colposcopic impressions versus this device, we found that the colposcopic impression which had about 60, close to less than 60% sensitivity, went up by almost double. with this device, which meant that we missed less people, or we were able to do about 45% more accurate detections than what colposcopy could determine using visual inspection by acetic acid, right? We compared it against HPV, we compared it against, HPV. Of course, HPV manifestation is HPV would be present virus, but not necessarily cancer, right? It could be just the HPV presence there. But we were able to actually detect HPV sensitivity versus our device sensitivity. Performed it by, right? And then, of course, people across the world said, hey, I mean, this is something that am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
So this is something that will actually change the way we do cervical cancer diagnosis. But at the same time, we needed to develop a lot more evidence so that we can replace the existing HPV or colposcopic plus whatever process is there, right? And the goal is that we will not stop biopsy, but we will continue to do biopsy, but we will do biopsy on necessary specimens that actually would be there, because the biopsy, 50% of them were negative, right? So it was like over treating a patient, and biopsy is not simple. You need to cut out samples from it. So we did this, set of presentations to a group of people, and we were approved by the national NHS in the UK, and they put it up as a standard practice in their primary care centers and examination screening centers. But what is more important is that we had an additional advantage. This was so accurate that it had a 97.3% specificity with a negative predictive value of 98%, which meant that we were not missing anybody, right? Or we were missing only 2% of the people. But at the same time, we came up with a new concept of what we call as a see and treat, in the sense that, cervical cancer patients would walk in, would be given a suspicious diagnosis with a colposcopic examination, and many of them will not come back, especially in India. They will not come back. They will say, oh my God, this is very difficult. And, so cervical cancer is something that people will say, I'd rather die than go through the process, radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and all that stuff. It's pretty expensive stuff. So we came up with this whole process of see and treat, which is the moment you see the thing, we don't wait for the biopsy report. We actually do a removal of that particular offending tumor or lesion, right? And this has become the norm now in the UK, in Europe, and it will slowly become a norm across the world. But India and other countries like Africa will adopt it based on the protocols that are laid by NHS and those sort of things. So I can hear the voices of people saying that see and treat, we need see and treat and all those things. But we'll have to wait till the time they understand what it means and they can actually practice it. Because even today, to do a loop excision, a gynecologist with special training is required. Normal gynecologists can't do a loop excision, right? So I was actually in a conference where there was a training program to train gynecologists to do a simple loop excision on the cervix to be able to do that. Because today they are trained only to remove the complete uterus, what we call as a radical hysterectomy, right? Which is something that, is 100% safe, but it's a over treatment, if you can call it that way. And this is what the product looks like. Portable, battery operated, quick to analyze, and it can be held by any nurse who doesn't understand cervical cancer but can detect it very positively with a 93% confidence, right? So this was basically something that, I thought probably would be an interesting thing there. Would there be any other question? This is what about I would say is the content of what I wanted to present. But then if there's any other questions, happy to add on to that.
Yeah, yes, I think this was quite relevant and a very insightful session. I hope that our participants and the applicants who want to apply will be, because this session is also getting recorded, so they can have of course, they can refer to the session later on also.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, I think we will be closing the session now, because we have already crossed more than 1 hour. So yeah, but it was actually quite an interesting session and very informative, and we are very thankful to you for such wonderful insights and the information you have provided. And thank you so much, Dr. Simha. And if the applicants have any further questions, they can write to us at the Bioincubator Gmail ID, and they can also reach out to us at the SIIC's website. So thank you so much, Dr. Simha, and we are closing the session now. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Pleasure being with you guys. Hope you found it useful. So yeah, I'm looking at some of the questions, but of course they're related to big and IP filing, and field testing is remaining. So am I eligible for this grant to complete my prototype for MVP? Of course you are. But you have to be able to convince us that your field testing is going in the right direction. Yet Varsha, you are eligible, right? Okay. You have already answered the question.
Yeah.
How do you obtain IP for a software platform? You don't have to obtain in the sense that you have copyrights, you have, stuff like that way, but you can't say that, some platform which is already existing there, it's, I want to get an IP on that just because I modified it. There are methods by which you can get copyright protection for your code and stuff like that. So you won't get a patent, but you'll get, other IP methods of this thing.
Yes. So yeah, for the code, there is copyright. There are no patents. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we'll be closing the session now. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you to the participants as well. Thank you so much.
All righty. Thank you.